Thank you for joining our show. Today, we have a special guest who is from Liberia and his incredible journey as a refugee. A refugee is someone who flees their country. But we are here to discuss the difference between a refugee and an immigrant. And there's a slang term that is used in Liberia. I was born here, I die here. Today, his name is Joseph K. Morris. Joseph, please tell me a little bit about yourself.
As you see, my name is Joseph K. Morris. That just to begin with, that most Liberians carry most of the names that are commonly used in the United States. That also brings back the history that linked Liberia to the United States. Liberia was founded by free American slaves, and when they went back home, a lot of our parents had to take their names in order to go to school. So this is how, I got the name Joseph Morris. And I've been out of Liberia since 1990. I've been to Sierra Leone as a refugee, and I went to Guinea as a refugee. I spent like 14 years out of Liberia in the refugee camp.
Wow, that's incredible. So what did you do before you left, while you were in Liberia, when you left Liberia? What did you actually attend? Did you go to college, or did you acquire college education while you were in Guinea and Sierra Leone? Because I know you were discussing with you, you said you had a little bit of engineering background. So how was that?
Actually, I was in the 11th grade when the war came in Liberia. So I left Liberia and went to Sierra Leone just to save my life. And when the war spilled over to Sierra Leone, I went to Guinea. Now, in Guinea, I was awarded a UN scholarship where I did civil engineering for 5 years on a UN scholarship at the University of Conakry. That's the only university in Guinea.
The slang term, I born here, I die here. How did that whole ideology come about, in your country? Why do people say that? I was born here, I die here. Why do they say that? Why do they believe in that?
That really bring back the stability that existed in Liberia before the war. Most Liberians were very reluctant when it came to leaving their country and going to other, neighboring countries. They felt that Liberia was stable in the sub-region, and everything they wanted was in Liberia. So they always said that I was born in Liberia and I would die in Liberia. So when the war came and a lot of Liberians began to flee the country, neighbors around Liberia began to provoke the Liberians, calling them, oh, I'm born here, I die here. Why are you running away? Because you always used to say, you're born in Liberia and you will die in Liberia. Why are you running away? So that is how this slang spread all around in refugee camps where Liberians were found.
Wow. Yeah. What do you think is the misconception that Americans have of refugees and immigrants? From your observation, being in this country so far, what do you think Americans really think of the difference between the two?
From my own personal experience, I feel that most people do not really understand who is a refugee and who is an immigrant. A refugee actually comes to America going through a lot of interviews, a lot of verifications, And the first thing is that a refugee who comes to America only has this as the only option to survive. Whereas the immigrant plan strategies and work on these plans to be able to come over to the United States. So for the refugee, he's already traumatized. And coming to the United States is the only resort. So you can't identify a refugee and an immigrant and put them into one category. It would really be a big mistake.
Why is that?
Because the refugee, for one, has a lot of trauma. He has gone through a lot. Take for example, me personally. I left Liberia and went to Sierra Leone. And everything I got in Sierra Leone, I lost them.
Wow.
And I went back to Guinea. The war spilled over to Guinea. I had lost everything again for the second time in my life. So you can imagine the trauma that a refugee is taking on his head, when they go to the social services and try to advocate for food stamps. and you see a normal immigrant who came to this country plan their trip and, and work out strategy to come over to this country, that's just a big difference between a refugee, and an immigrant standing in the social services offices, and asking for food stamps.
Wow. I know earlier you and I, we had to do a workshop, and in our workshop that we had to illustrate like negative attachments and positive and all that about kids we've dealt with. What are some of the experiences? Because now you're older, you're a man and everything. What are some experiences you have had dealing with some of the youth back in your country? That you would like to share with the audience out there, as far as them not having fathers and all the different trauma that they have dealt with in their lives.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that question in particular, because I also work with the school system here, and since I've been working with the school system, I observed that there's a lot of changes being made in the life of most of these refugee kids that is really affecting them. People are not taking into consideration the trauma that these refugees went through.
That's right.
And the life in the refugee camps. Most of these kids, this is the first time for them to go through a normal routine.
That's right.
Even for we, the elderly ones, as a refugee, to just wake up in the morning and follow a normal routine is difficult. What's more about a refugee kid who has never been to school, and he's at the age of 14, and his first time to enter in a school building, he found himself in the 9th grade or 10th grade.
That's right.
Now, you can imagine the cultural shock before you come to the academic or challenge that he will be faced with. So that alone can break him down, and he will lose all his self-esteem, no matter how strong he has been. So I think it's important that the school system here, or wheresoever they are educating refugees, should have a transitional class where they can mold these refugees into preparing, for the regular academic level in the American schools.
That's right.
Because the refugee schools back in the camps were not really regular, and attendance were not as regular as here, because every time there was war and the refugee had to move. And most of the kids could not really go to school. They had to spend the rest of their life trying to find food, for their mothers, and their parents and stuff. And now they find themselves in a situation where they have to go to school, they have to learn. So it's very important that we try to secure their own self-esteem that they have. That self-esteem that refugees have from being very strong, very persevering, to maintain that and keep that alive, so that we can encourage them to move on with the normal school system in the American schools.
I like the way you put that, with the normal school system. Can you share with the audience some of the experience? Because for a lot of people who are listening to the show today, they don't quite understand the impact, the trauma that some of these youth deal with. Some of the teenagers probably see them in their schools, and they probably say, "Oh, this kid is from Somalia, this kid's from Liberia, or this kid's from Bosnia or Albania," but they don't understand the impact, the real impact that these kids had to deal with. Can you share an example with some of the audience, the viewers today, about just a couple examples that some of the youth have dealt with coming to this country?
Yeah, I would take myself for a practical example. I personally lost a brother, that I saw being slaughtered in front of me.
That's right.
That alone was a heavy load, for me to carry. And to walk through butchers, to survive and go to another country, and you see war entering in that country as a refugee, fleeing among citizens of that country. That's just very scary, and it just increases your trauma. And going to another country 2 different times, and you have to lose everything, you have to lose relatives and friends all along the way. So most of these kids you see, they may only be the one single kid from their own clan. Most of them are being taken care of by their relatives, because family definition from an African perspective is larger than, like a nuclear family here. Now, because they have lost everything, they have lost their parents, it's just so difficult for them to sit and concentrate like a normal, American kid, that is living with the dad, and stuff like that. Besides living with your parents, they really need another system that will try to de-traumatize some of these students, so that they would be able to interact. Just besides being a refugee, the social interaction of a normal African who has not gone through the refugee camp, coming over to the United States, he actually needs some time to be able to integrate in the society. What's more about a refugee boy who has stayed in the camp all his life, running from one place to another, watching his parents being killed, his village being burned down, coming down from that wreckage over to the United States, the city of Hartford, looking at the gold building, seeing the buses passing. That alone social challenge is like a deep challenge for him. So I mean, those students who are working with refugees, like that have refugee peers in class and things, I think it's important that they look at the refugee from a positive perspective and try to see how they can encourage them, how they can build them up. Because you may not really realize how much impact it will have just by smiling to a refugee,
That's right.
So it's not really about federal funds, but it just needs attention. People need to be educated so that they would know the difference between a refugee and an immigrant.
That's right.
And to really realize that these refugees are strong people, they are victorious with all the burdens and things, they was able to come this far. If you can give them any push, like smiling to them and shaking hands with them in the hallways and things, that can make a big impact in their life, and it can really have a positive impact in helping them to integrate, socially in the system in the United States.
That was beautifully said. I agree with that 100%. Just a smile.
Yeah, just a smile alone,
A smile alone can make
Yeah.
somebody feel accepted and respect.
Exactly.
That's very
exactly,
true.
Exactly.
As you and I were discussing earlier about, Liberia having a woman president,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
and here in the United States, we never have had a female president.
No.
What kind of changes and impact do you think a female president is going to have on your country? And do you think the older generation, like your father and people within that generation, will actually accept a female being a president of a country?
Yeah, that's a very deep one, and that's very important. The first impact, the immediate impact that this is going to have on Liberia as a whole is that the rate of female enrollment in schools is going to go up because everyone's going to look at a female president as a role model, and they're going to believe that their daughters and sisters can do the same. Because back in the days when I was going to school, parents were not investing their money in sending girls to school because they felt that, the girls would get pregnant in the early stage, and definitely the money, that they spend, their investment will go in vain.
Wow.
Considering, the standard of living and the hardship, to just invest your hard money, in someone that you're not sure of. So that really discourages a lot of parents, sending their kids to school. But right now, I think the phase is going to change. We're going to move to another era where most parents are going to encourage, girls' children to go to school. Then when you come down to accepting leadership from a female, that's going to take some time. For our generation, we will be able to accept that because we've sat in classrooms with females and we know their academic potential, their capability and stuff. But for those of our parents, and grandparents, it's just very difficult, to accept the fact that a female can lead, a nation.
That's right.
I can give you a practical example. My dad cannot compromise why a female, should rule a nation. we sat in classrooms with females, so definitely we are aware that there are a lot of talents that boys have, that females do have too. So I think as the time goes by, this young generation is going to grow, and the idea of female empowerment, will spread in Liberia, and I'm very sure this is a signal to other African nations that female can do better too, So right now, all the African nations, are looking at Liberia as the role model to see what a female can do. And I know that this is actually going to impact, the entire sub-region. And that it will send a message across too, to our big brothers, like the United States and other big countries, that female can able to do well. And this is why we keep throwing the challenge, to other countries outside. Now, this is the movement that we have, democracy back home. We have a female president. She have a lot of challenge.
Yes,
the
does.
challenges that she have, is like a mountain, that they can move in with the technical know-how to be able to put things in place so that Liberia can move ahead. And let she play this particular role model, in Africa, and the world at large.
That's right. I did a little bit of research on her, and I noticed that her education, most of her education came from the United States.
Exactly.
And it was very interesting to me because Liberia was founded by African Americans, as far as the independence.
Exactly.
And what I found interesting is that, do you think it would have been better for her to be educated in Africa, or a country in Africa, where she will understand more of her people, than to be educated here in the United States? Because now you have more of a Western thought. Or do you think it even matters?
Well, for her case in particular,
Right.
I don't think it matters at all, because she has been in Liberia for a long time. She has worked for the past regime in the 80s.
Right.
And she was also in Liberia during the time of Charles Taylor. She was held in prison. So she actually know the problem on the ground. And besides knowing the problem, she needed the education that she had from the United States that helped her to get the contacts, that she was able to work with UNDP, the World Bank. And I think these experiences and contacts that she have are essential elements that our country need right now, after being broken down by the war.
That's right.
For this country to be able to pull out, it needs just more like an ordinary person. It needs just more than an ordinary countryman. It needs somebody beyond that. And I think she's staying in a better position, with her background in economics. We should be the backbone for, setting a strong foundation, to give a sustainable support to Liberia growing up. She's staying in a better position right now.
That's right.
So I think it was good that she came to America. It was good that she got this good education from here. And I hope she can just, be the right person to make the better use so that our country can be peaceful and prosperous.
Oh, I love the way you put that. Peaceful and prosperous.
Yeah.
And since you emphasize peace, because here in this city, the city of Hartford, we don't have peace like that.
No.
And, we have a lot of violence that is taking place in the city. And when I think of the violence, there's really no comparison to the Civil War that
No. not at
Liberia
all.
endured.
No, not at
But
all.
what kind of aspects or like quality, do you see any similarities between the way the youth, carry themselves, when you compare it to Liberia? I mean, what kind of similarities do you see, or do you see any, like, far as future in the city, as far as the transition of the city maybe turn into a peaceful city?
Yeah.
Like you want to see your country turn into a peaceful area.
I know. Well, like, for back home, we also have like these gangs,
Right.
people hanging out, calling themselves gangs and stuff like that. But just as you put it, the Civil War violence is completely different from what is going on here.
Explain.
Yeah, people have different objectives for engaging in violence here. But for the Civil War, it's completely out of chance, out of no choice. you've lost your parents, and a lot of the fighters want to revenge, for what happened to their parents. And a lot of kids, they want to stay alive, they want to survive. They don't have job, they don't have food, so they have to take the gun to be able to survive.
That's right.
So there's a big difference, in violence back home and the violence that is taking place here. But the similarities here is that most of, even the warlords back home, they all hang up, in gangs and stuff. Just how you see gangs around here operating, it's the same. Yeah, it's the same old thing. Yeah, so those are some similarity. And like for a refugee, to be placed after seeing, all those things and hearing gunshots, every time a refugee hear a gunshot, it definitely remind him, that the war is not over. Wow. So that's very deep.
That is deep.
And that's why we emphasize, like, if you brought a refugee in the city of Hartford, and you are going to use money to pay, for his dwelling, put him in a more considerable, quiet environment.
Wow.
We know that Hartford, it not be quiet completely, but not on streets where violence, is always occurring,
It's a reminder.
And we have some of these babies, when they hear the shot, and they will call their mother, is that the rebel? It's still sad to sit right by the Statue of Liberty, like you are already free, freedom at last, and you hear a gunshot, That's just recurrence of the trauma, in your head and stuff. So that's why for the past time we've been, working with the agency responsible for placing the refugee so that they can find a more, quiet environment that will help these people to have some peace. Because your interpretation from hearing a gun sound is different from my interpretation from hearing a gun sound.
That's right.
So the picture that comes to me is greater than your own picture. So there's a big difference, between like violence, gun, sound of gun, and everything, interpretation when it comes to a refugee and just a normal person.
I like the way you phrase that, like hearing a gunshot reminds you of the rebels and the impact that's having on the youth who are so young coming over here just to go to school. Who's to blame for that when you really think about it? Like, why would sending a child to a city like Hartford, which is the 5th poorest city in the nation, and we have homicide, in the top 10. We're in the top 10, even for homicide. We're up there compared with Detroit. And what are the strategies would you have for the government to help these youth who are coming over here, who have that reminder?
Yeah.
What other strategies does Mr. Morris have that'll help this transition even become even better for these kids?
Yeah, I think the first thing is the families need to be empowered. The big difference between the African family and the typical American family is that the power is being, taken away from most families when they come over here. So that's the first difficulty that we face. The interpretation of interaction between an African father and an African child should really be considered, especially when they are entering the country for the first 1 or 2 years.
Right.
We insisted that there be a transitional interpreters of some of these values, cultural interpretation, before even it can go to the state level, to DCF. So the first thing that government would do to help these people is to empower them. You can empower a parent by helping them to get a better job. That's the first thing. Then the second thing is to encourage what you have here, like during the summer, to have a lot of summer activities for these kids, to engage them in a lot of summer activities. Right now we have a soccer team for the Liberian refugees. And we having support from the city to support this team, you know. But we still find it difficult to keep the team together. So in order for these kids to really respect their parents and be able to go to school, we encourage the city to engage most of the refugees here in summer activities, most of the productive activities. And most of the activities that have been programmed were not activities that these refugees enjoy. So we also insisted that the refugees be consulted, like what are the activities you enjoy doing. Some of the activities that may seem exciting, you know, to American kids may seem boring to, you know, a refugee kid.
That's right.
So we also advocate for the inclusion of parents in like lining up activities for these kids so that the parents will put in some cultural ingredients, you know, in these activities that will help to reinforce the identity of these kids. Because if they lost their identity, then definitely they get lost in the street. So that's our major challenge right now. How to keep these kids off the street, how to make sure that they keep our identity, and how to engage them in every activity that will support them staying in school. So that's what we are working on right now.
Very good. Do you think many of the youth, the refugees who are coming to this country, especially the youth between the ages of, let's say, 13 to 18, do you think they're becoming more Americanized as they stay in this country? Because now they're looking at the videos, they're looking at their peers in school, and they're saying, and they're being brought up in this culture. So now they're starting to forget a little bit of the traditional values that they were brought up, because now I don't have my family around as much. And what do you think you can do and other organizations can do so that these refugees, these youth, because that's the future of your country, that's the future of your people, so that they do not lose their values and their morals? What do you think you can do and other agencies can do?
The first thing that we've been trying to do is to make sure that we have, like, you know, a cultural environment, that maybe try to rent a small building here where we can put cultural representation from our country, you know. And we have regular meetings. We have an association here, you know, just for the Liberian refugees, to make sure that we stay together and to make sure that, you know, they are not deviating. And we do a direct interpretation of what the consequences are. Because a lot of them don't really know what the consequence is, you know, for just smoking.
That's right.
Something that is illegal. They really don't know the consequences for that. So we try to kind of like interpret the laws to their level so that they understand it. And let them know the consequences for each of the time that they will break any of these laws.
That's right.
And for now, we have like 80% of the kids, they're just dressing like American, you know, boys would do, and they want to speak like, you know, the American boys would do. And it's kind of like playing a double role on them.
That's right.
Because number one, the parents do not have the financial capability to be able to respond to those demands. So definitely they put the parent in a very, you know, embarrassing situation. And if a parent cannot provide the need of the child, then definitely they lose that particular respect, that connection, you know, that bond a parent or a child will be broken. So that is a serious challenge. So they want to wear the big chains that is very expensive. They want to wear those clothes, you know, and those bling bling, you know, and stuff like that. And that is completely tearing down the community. We have reports of kids not taking order from their parents anymore, and they have just been here for 1 year. So that's a big challenge, you know, for the community, especially for refugees who are just coming to the United States. And some of these kids too, they have not enjoyed freedom all their life. This is the first time to sense freedom. So if they are not guarded properly, to make the proper use of this freedom is going to lead them astray.
That's right.
You know, so it's a big challenge, and the barrier, you know, that hold a parent from punishing the kid too, is also, you know, playing some setback on parent ready disciplining their kids here. So that also is a problem in between, you know, the parent and the child.
Joseph, I would like to say thank you for joining our show. I enjoyed this conversation. But for the viewers out there, there are 2 books I would like to dedicate for this show. The first one is Angela's Ashes, which is by Frank McCourt. This book is an incredible book about his journey from Ireland and how he became a successful high school teacher in Brooklyn, New York, and all the obstacles he had to go through in order to come to this country. I would highly recommend this book. And as Joseph said earlier, freedom. Freedom is something that many of us take for granted. But we must understand the importance of having freedom and understand that when certain people who don't actually endure that freedom, you know, we have to help them understand how to have that freedom and enjoy it in a nice, successful way. And this book here, I will highly recommend everyone out there to read this book. It's the autobiography of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela gave up his entire life for his people. And you have to understand the power of sacrificing your own life for your people. If you want to make change and you want to do something and you want to see the change in this community, you have to begin and start changing yourself first. Because when you work within yourself, you will see the outcome in the long run. And as Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. Be the change you want to see in the world. And that's what Nelson Mandela did. Thank you for joining the show.